Hey everybody, QG here. Ever since the release of Ants and Prince of Egypt, Dreamworks has been a consistent competitor with Disney in the realm of animated films and seemed to have gained back the favor of the audience as of late. As someone who grew up with and preferred Dreamworks, I think they have a wide pool of characters that would be really fun to see actually interact with each other. There's been a handful of Dreamworks crossover games, but nothing too substantial and certainly nothing that's been recurring as like a franchise or anything. For today's video though, I'm going to be going over the hypothetical scenario of a Dreamworks fighting game and what I think the roster should look like. There's a couple of rules I have going into this, such as the characters must be owned by Dreamworks, or at the very least very closely associated with Dreamworks. I also settled on a roster size of 24 characters, because I personally feel like having too big a roster for these hypotheticals takes away some of the challenge of making them. With that, let's go ahead and get started with the Unlocked from the Start cast, so essentially the first half. First off, very obviously, we have to include Shrek. He's got long arms, so I imagine his punches would reach far, and he'd probably have some solid grabs and throws as well, making him a well-rounded bruiser. And for him in particular, I imagine some of his moves would allow him to call upon Donkey to do some damage too. Note, as a result of this, Donkey is not part of the roster, he is a part of Shrek's moveset. Next up is Fiona, another pretty obvious inclusion here. You could probably take her moveset in several different directions by putting emphasis on her karate abilities, or use her singing as a method to cause damage, maybe even allow her to call upon other Shrek universe characters like Gingy or Pinocchio. Regardless, she's a great addition to this lineup. Your favorite fearless hero is next. It's Puss in Boots. Besides the obvious fact that he's iconic and beloved by many, I couldn't not include a sword fighter in this roster. I imagine he'd use his typical sword as well as his new smaller blade given to him by Kitty in Last Wish. Maybe some dance moves to boot as well. The next character's inclusion is just right, it's Goldilocks. While maybe not everyone's first thought when it comes to adding characters here, I think she'd make for a really fun addition and could bring along the three bears to assist her in battle, which would undoubtedly be really cool and really fun to play. If you like to move it, you'll really enjoy this next character. It's King Julian. No doubt using lots of dance moves and other types of wacky moves as part of his moveset, he'd make for a very entertaining character, and he'd no doubt bring Maurice and Mort along for the ride. Perhaps he'd also invite his bear girlfriend from the third movie. Who knows? But perhaps zaniness isn't your forte. Maybe efficiency is more your thing. Then look no further than the Penguins of Madagascar. The breakout stars of the Madagascar franchise would be a 4-in-1 character here. Skipper leading the pack, Kowalski being the brains of the squad, Rico being the explosive expert, and Private is also here. I envision they'd stack on top of each other Super Brawl 3 Rabbids style, maybe switching around their positioning after certain attacks. Just remember, cute and cuddly. That last fighter might have been a little complicated to wrap your head around, so how about something more straightforward? Kung Fu, or more specifically Po from Kung Fu Panda. I mean, do I even have to elaborate why he's here, or what his moveset would be like? Heck, he's been in his own platform fighter already. Enough said. Speaking of beloved Dreamworks films though, How to Train Your Dragon is one of the highest rated animated film franchises ever, so it only makes sense to include the leads of these films, Hiccup and Toothless. Mind you, they're not a duo character, they each take up their own slot and function by themselves. Hiccup would probably be another sword fighter, but would of course act completely differently from Puss in Boots in skill and speed especially. Toothless is, well, he's a dragon. You can imagine what a character like that would do in a fighting game. With, of course, his biggest drawback probably being his size, as I imagine he'd be the largest character in the game by a lot. Even so, they'd make for great additions. While we're on the topic of big things, Megaminds definitely got potential in this hypothetical lineup. Being a villain turned good gives him a bit of an edge compared to a lot of other characters here, and yet he's still a bit of a goof. He's a perfect fit, basically. Of course, his moveset would be more show than raw power, but what he may lack in physical strength, he'd more than make up for in gadgets. Hydration guns, rocket pack and custom fisticuffs, minion or his little robot drone things, he's got plenty to work with that would ensure a speedy victory. How devilishly joyful. But if you want someone even more joyful than that, Poppy may be your best bet. Trolls may not be favored by a lot of people, but regardless what you think of the films, you have to admit that there's some really good fighter capabilities here, mainly in their hair. It's shown time and time again throughout these films that trolls can do a lot of wacky things with their hair. They essentially function as shape-shifting limbs. From whips to wigs, their hair kinda does it all. The moveset centered around this quirk I think would make for a really interesting long-range fighter. That and Poppy's general behavior would be really endearing to have in a fighting game. And if you thought Poppy had long range, look no further than Dreamworks' newest protagonist, Ruby Gillman. While admittedly not making as big a splash as I'm sure Dreamworks hoped, there's absolutely no denying that she'd make for a great fighter. Even ignoring her obvious Kraken skill potential, she's very bendy and would probably have some really bizarre looking attacks as a result. If you want Smash characters to compare to, Poppy would be like Simon-ish, while Ruby is probably closer to Min-Min. And with that, we have our starting roster. We're halfway through now, so it's time to get into the locked characters. Big Jack Horner is such an obvious inclusion here. With his grand size and wide assortment of magical tools from his magic bag, the dude's moveset is practically limitless, really. It'd be fun to beat him up, and it'd be fun to play as him. I don't think I need to say much else here. We need a speedy character or two in this lineup, I feel. Puss in Boots and the Penguins probably fit that role, but I want someone more outwardly fast. Enter Hammy. You could do so much with this character. Having him rush to catch a laser pointer causes his opponents to slow down temporarily after drinking an energy drink. Maybe using a boomerang from that one short. Hammy just feels like a really solid addition to the lineup overall. Lord Shen would be a fantastic pick for a game like this, no doubt being very fast and very vicious with his playstyle. I suppose he'd also be a sword fighter, but definitely has more to work with than just that. I don't know, man. Do I have to explain myself here? It's Lord Shen. Anyone who's familiar with this character knows why he's great for a fighting game. It just makes sense, right? The heartthrob of a generation of Tumblr users, Jack Frost would undoubtedly be a great pick for a game like this. Rise of the Guardians had quite a few good potential fighter ideas, but I ultimately settled with Jack as the thought of an ice-centered fighter sounded cool to me. He'd no doubt be floaty as well, so he's probably somewhere between Mewtwo and Lucas playstyle-wise. Nonetheless, he sounds like he'd be really fun. Again, I'm aware Trolls is not a beloved Dreamworks franchise, but it is popular, and like I said, has great fighter potential. Plus, I'm a sucker for any opportunity to include a rocker character, so here's Barb. She also has hair abilities like Poppy, but usually focuses more on her guitar, which no doubt would be her main method of attack. Perhaps she'd be capable of mind controlling the opponents with the guitar temporarily like she does in the movie, it's hard to say. Regardless, she'd make for a really entertaining character. The Croods is certainly one of the Dreamworks films to ever exist, but if anything noteworthy has come from the franchise, it's definitely Grug. I imagine as a caveman he'd be a pretty well-equipped heavyweight fighter, but the difference here being that we know he's fast. So think more Smash Ultimate Bowser than, well, Melee Bowser. Maybe he'd be capable of throwing big rocks or calling upon that one grassy Sabretooth or whatever. Point is, Grug has a lot of potential and feels right to include out of anyone in that series. The Kung Fu Panda franchise is a host to so many good fighter picks, but we've already got two heavy hitters, so while I don't want to stray away from major players in the franchise, I also like some variety. That's why the next character is Master Oogway. The reason I went with him is because, well, one, he's a very beloved character, especially in meme circles, but he would also implement something not really seen across any of the other mentioned characters, that being an all-defense playstyle. I imagine Oogway would be all defense and minimal offense, or at least his defense would be his offense, if that makes sense. He'd probably also utilize wind boxes and similar attributes to take out opponents rather than getting his hands messy himself. I don't know, could be cool. Over the Hedge is a pretty fondly looked back upon film for a multitude of reasons, but one of the biggest is definitely the Verminator. Not only is his inclusion really funny, but he's also got quite a bit of moveset potential as well, likely using his shock stick, his prodder, whatever you call it, as his main means of attack. He's also got guns that shoot out nets to capture, and could maybe even set up laser traps that do some serious damage. Opponents will be vanquished. So there's 4 characters left, however 3 of these characters are more not directly Dreamworks associated. So this next character will be the last proper Dreamworks character, and it is Death. It's Death. Did you honestly think I wasn't gonna include him? The Shrek franchise can never have too many reps, seeing as it's basically the Dreamworks franchise, and seeing as Puss in Boots: The Last Wish is now the highest rated Shrek franchise film, I feel it's appropriate to include every major villain from it. That and, you know, they all have great fighting potential and have quickly become favorites online. I don't think I need to explain how Death would play, just look at him. So, this is technically cheating, because while Dreamworks did help make Chicken Run, they don't actually own the IP or anything, so including a character from it seems wrong, right? Well, I don't think so. For one, like I said, Dreamworks helped make the first one, so no matter how good the sequel ends up turning out, Dreamworks will always be associated with Chicken Run. Second, this film was a big deal when it came out. So much so that when it got gypped at the Oscars, the backlash was enough to convince the Academy to make the Best Animated Feature category as a means of ensuring that they wouldn't be missed out on again. This happening basically led to Shrek becoming a cultural phenomenon and DreamWorks becoming DreamWorks. We could definitely attribute Shrek as being the reason why DreamWorks is where they are today, but without Chicken Run, there's not nearly as popular as Shrek. Because of this, I think Chicken Run has cemented itself in animation history, so it feels appropriate then to include the Prison Break artist herself, Ginger. There's so many tools and equipment that you could utilize from just the first film, and I imagine the sequel will be no different here when it comes out. Her main method of attack would probably be with a giant spoon. It feels right, anyways. Not much to say here, honestly. Ginger is more a symbolic pick than one favored for her fighting capabilities. So, in mid-2012, Dreamworks acquired Classic Media, which was essentially an animation company that happens to own a lot of franchises you've probably heard of, but never knew who owned them, such as Casper in the original Rankin Bass films, so Rudolph and the like. I've decided to include 2 characters that were gained by Dreamworks from this acquisition, the first being Waldo. So many people have heard of Where's Waldo, of course, but how would he work in the context of a fighting game? Well, I imagine he'd be somewhat of a hit-and-run type character, being able to teleport freely, temporarily become intangible, and mainly use his walking stick to dish out damage. I'm sure there's other material you could pull from his inspiration for his moveset, but I think sticking to basics like this would make for a really entertaining character overall. Classic Media happens to own another animation studio most of you have probably heard of, that being Big Idea. As a result, my last character for this DreamWorks fighting game roster is LarryBoy. You've got so much you can work with here, mainly involving the plungers, but I think you could totally take inspiration from his video game as well and have things such as his cape, turning metallic, turning into energy, spraying water, gliding, etc. as part of his moveset. Plus, who wouldn't want to play as LarryBoy? I mean, honestly. And with that, we have my take on a DreamWorks fighting game roster. I feel like I did a pretty good job balancing between old and new, popular and niche, genuine and joke, etc. when picking this roster, but I'd love to see your guys' take on this idea in the comments below. Otherwise, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. Maybe let me know if there's other fighting game roster concepts you'd like to see me tackle. I'm sure they'd be pretty fun and challenging. Until the next video, peace.